Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Rice Report. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about today's guest in our interview series. I have GMoney here from Bullion BS and Bullion, Bitcoin, and BS on Telegram. GMoney is a Bitcoiner, a Bitcoin maxi. I myself have always kind of spoken against tribalism. I understand it on both sides of the fence, and I think that there's a clear pathway for good discussions that need to happen in the marketplace. We're going to cover a lot of topics in about an hour today. But I want to welcome you onto the show, GMoney, and I just appreciate all the work you've put in, standing your ground in an audience that does not want to hear about Bitcoin quite frequently, and taking those punches. So thank you for being here, brother.
Yeah, dude, I love your energy and your approach to this. So thanks for having me on.
Well, let's talk about your Bitcoin thesis. And I think that's one of the things that people forget, because no one really comes up with their own thesis anymore. I've done my breakdown. I've listened to yours. I think it's fascinating the way that you've kind of put all these pieces together, really going back to inception of Bitcoin. So if you can, maybe just quickly or simply walk everyone through how you got to become, Bitcoin only, Bitcoin maxi.
Yeah, so I mean, my journey started really with Ron Paul, right? Ron Paul is kind of the epicenter of my learning about the Federal Reserve, right? He was a guy that talked about ending the Fed, and politics to me were always kind of boring because, after really listening to that to Dr. Paul, you realize, like, they're kind of two birds of the same feather. You really can't fix much unless you fix the money. And so I was a big gold guy. I bought a ton of gold.
Same here.
10 years straight. Returns sucked. I think I was like down, right? Until recently, obviously. But I dumped my gold before the returns, of course. But I dumped it all into Bitcoin. And so I kind of got, I got a little fed up with it. I'm like, gold isn't really doing much. And I then learned about Bitcoin, of course. And then, I've been a tech guy kind of my whole career. And so I looked at Mount Gox, and I was even on Silk Road back in the day because I was looking at really cool, like, stuff, let's just say. And I never got involved because I had little kids, and I'm like, well, Silk Road looks like a total Fed trap. I'm like, this Bitcoin thing looks like a total another Fed trap, because you're just, you're living your life in this very controlled world of surveillance on everything. And, the people that first got into Bitcoin were rewarded appropriately, right? They went into a system in a surveillance state, and they knew, like, it was even more kind of surveillance in that system to some degree. Like, they were getting involved in a system that could potentially, open up those things. And so I was kind of stayed away from it until I really learned about it, and then had to buy some because I wanted to buy some expensive whiskey that was online with this fancy website. And, I actually, the guy only wanted Bitcoin. So I went to Coinbase in like 2016, and I think Bitcoin was around $400 at the time. And I think I spent like $300 on this whiskey. So I sent him
Most
like
expensive whiskey you've ever had in your life.
Oh yeah. So I sent him 0.75 or 0.8 Bitcoin for this whiskey. The whiskey never showed up, actually. So it's the most expensive whiskey I never got to try. And so a bunch of us like had this group on Facebook, and we got them shut down or whatever. But then I there's something to this. And then, of course, I bought all the shit coins, got rug pulled, and then, 2017, I think a year later, I finally had my aha moment to where I was like, oh, wow, like there's actually, this is actually a better solution than gold is. And then, combining that with some of my, I guess, conspiratorial stuff, because I was in the Las Vegas shooting. So it's kind of like this awakening on two sides.
Wait. You were there at the concert?
Yeah, I was there around anyone. Yeah. And so I was always kind of like a mildly like Alex Jones type, where I like to listen to some of it just because it was entertaining.
Sure.
And then when you're actually at an event like that, and you kind of have that near-death experience, like, something inside you is pissed off. It changes you. And really, after that, I started researching everything I could online to figure out like what happened, because, there's been a lot of events in our history that have been a little, let's say, like the narrative didn't really match the story, or the events didn't match the story that actually happened. And so I knew for sure, like, what happened in Vegas was not the story being portrayed on the media, and it pissed me off. And I was, determined to at least get some of the truth of what happened that night. And then, of course, I run into the Q stuff. And then those two paths kind of combined to where I'm like, well, Q sounds great, but you can't really arrest people unless you fix the money. I go, this money thing sounds great, but like, the NWO, the people that will never let this thing actually grow to what it needs to be successful if we're really going to actually win this thing. But then you're like, well, if they're connected, it seems
Right.
like a no-brainer at that point. And that's when I went full into, holy shit, like people are missing this entire foundational block of both sides to win this battle. And that's where we get into, I'll just kind of preface it at that. Like that's kind of the my origin story, so to say.
Sure. Sure. When you put pieces together, like from 2015, like one of the things I remember seeing on your channel is that in 2019 or 2020, Trump authorized banks to actually custody Bitcoin. And that sounded like a conspiracy theory until Nashville, where Howard Lutnick said the exact same thing. So silently, Trump actually authorized banks to custody Bitcoin in like 2020 or 2019, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So in this studying of this topic, I basically foretold Trump becoming a Bitcoin maximalist through certain research and proofs that I have put together. And yeah, a lot of that started with Brian Brooks. So Brian Brooks was he was a director of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, where they control 70% of the banks in the United States. And so him, along with Steve Mnuchin, injected it or made it legal for banks to custodial Bitcoin right after the pandemic, right, in March of 2020. So some really interesting things happened in that time frame to where everybody was concerned about the pandemic. Nobody really cared about the other stuff. But in essence, what happened was the Federal Reserve was kind of moved, or at least, merged with the Treasury to some degree.
Yes.
And not only that, but they're printing a ton of money. And they also, the OCC guy just, randomly stepped down. They removed the reserve requirement to zero. They did all this crazy stuff in the financial system, which nobody was really paying attention to.
No.
But, Brian Brooks was the chief legal officer for Coinbase. And so, you have Trump appoint the chief legal officer for a crypto firm back when he was calling it like a scam, or essentially seemed like a scam. He didn't call it a scam. He said it seemed like it. And, you're wondering, well, why would Trump hire the chief legal officer from a crypto firm if he was totally against it? And then, he goes on to actually offer Brian a full-time position because it was one of those temporary ones. But of course, when his time ran out, the Senate didn't have enough time to confirm him. And so Brian didn't get confirmed as the OCC. He went on to be the CEO and other stuff that he did. But yeah, like if you look at the actual actions that have taken place in Bitcoin's history, you can see some pieces fit together that really make it look like there is some type of coordination happening in the background. I like to start with a Genesis block, and the Genesis block was minted on January 3rd, 2009. And funny enough, right, Bitcoin, the US government released a guide called the Coin Manual, and COIN stands for counterinsurgency, which is kind of this global, effort on how to establish, these warfighting tactics in the fifth domain, right? The PSYOP war, the war for your mind, the war in what is legitimate. Okay. And so that really is like the core of my thesis of Bitcoin is like this digital 1776, a worldwide digital 1776, because if you understand, our Declaration of Independence, power comes from consent of the governed, right? The government does automatically have power. We give them power through our consent, right?
Which is
And
constantly manufactured through psychological operations, constantly.
through psychological operations, through propaganda, right? Hey, trust us. You want to be safe, don't you? Right? It's that constant fear mongering that keeps us in this, basically state of fear our entire lives, right? To where we're actually afraid to do anything, and that's initially gets me back to where I first started, right? Was like, I was afraid to get involved. The surveillance state, right? And so it's a weird process of you actually becoming undomesticated when you start adopting this technology, because it does give you true power. And so back to the, the digital 1776 part is multiple other documents inside the government, CIA, talk about insurgencies and talk about shadow government. We know JFK talked about secret societies, and where real power relies on not just the politicians, but a secret group of people, cabal, whatever you want to call them, New World Order, that are actually pulling the strings and levers behind the scenes. And a battle for insurgency versus counterinsurgency is this battle for legitimacy. Okay. And that's what is dictated in these different guides. And if you think about Bitcoin as a digital counterinsurgency, right, battling illegitimate actors, the insurgents are that global elite that are running the power levers behind the politicians.
Yep.
And then you have us as the digital counterinsurgency, to where power truly comes back to the people through freedom tech, right? Bitcoin is the ultimate freedom tech, but the battle of legitimacy is a battle of consent,
Yes.
right? If I don't think you're legitimate, I am no longer going to consent to your authority. And that's the simplest terms I think people need to understand, is that, you know, a lot of us have moral red lines. We have a code in which we live by, to where we naturally just don't go kill people. We don't go hurt people. We have this nature to us that some of us don't want. We want a better life for everybody to some degree, right?
Mhm.
We don't want the zero sum game that my gain in life or whatever it is has to come at your expense. And so if you like kind of extrapolate that, we get to this amazing technology of Bitcoin, to where individuals that refuse to let's say pay their taxes, okay, they say they refuse to contribute to a cartel, a criminal enterprise that is built upon death, destruction, and theft, right? Which is your government. I'm sorry to bring this up to some of you people, and the religious folks especially. Like I have some of my biggest gripes is with the religious folks who hide behind. Some of them hide behind 501c3s, and so if your church hides behind a 501c3, you are a ward of the state, because your institution relies on federal money. That's just, or it relies on you keeping your mouth shut. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
I mean, you can look back to scripture and the changes in scripture throughout time, like even getting into, Ephesians, right, where we battle not against flesh and bone, but the powers and principalities of this world. Well, if you go back to the Geneva Bible, it specifically states worldly governors. It literally says in the Bible, worldly governors. You won't find that in a modern translation. So I completely agree with that.
yeah, I mean, it's about, the pharaohs, right, releasing the Israelites, and, people being, but, they wandered the desert forever. They didn't know they were afraid to take their power back. They were afraid of what would happen if they just followed their true self, and what that meant to kind of follow your own moral code and not be afraid of the, things that would happen if you were to do that. And so, a lot of this has to do with empowering the individual, right? Empowering sovereignty to the individual, because we're under this false impression that we need a large government bureaucracy, or else the entire world would go to shit, right?
Yeah.
And that's just this thing that we've lived in forever, because we were born into it, right? We're born into a system of bondage through our fiat system. We're born into a system of domestication through our institutionalized, schooling, big pharma, government, whatever you want to call it. Every angle, right, is a level of domestication. And essentially what they've done is they've defanged the alphas in our society. And what I mean by that is they have taken to credentialize everything, permissions for everything, licenses for everything, right? Fees for everything. And so you're constantly, as a human, your energy, if you think of your lifespan as like a battery, you're sitting at a capacity of only a 50%, right? When you're born, basically. Like you don't, even though you've got 100%, initially you're basically at 50, because you can no longer achieve those higher levels of energy, let's say conservation, because of the systems, the third parties that have been built upon this society that we currently live in.
Yeah.
And it takes, it takes true courage to actually be able to see past that, and to ascend in living that higher purpose of, look, I'm not going to bow down to God Kings. I'm not going to contribute to theft, corruption, death, and destruction. And I'm going to live my life the way I, free and not afraid. And, that takes some courage. And so that's kind of really what this is about. It's not about the money. It's not about the technology. In a sense it is, but really it's about the ultimate weapon that decentralizes power from those in control that have been in control the entire time.
Yeah. And I think that's a part that a lot of people will find somebody who's a Bitcoiner and assume it's always about the money. I'm very much the same. For me, what part of my research was looking at, I'm a nerd, so I look into a lot of nerdy things. And when you start seeing 800 exahash per second of computing power in a decentralized system, if you actually understand what that means, I'll be happy. There's a video on here, you can check it out. When you actually break that down, that's 30 gigawatts of energy being run throughout the world on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of computing units. And you start to realize that security and decentralization is found as its own independent energetic nation state, which is what Bitcoin has essentially become. Poland uses 29.5 gigawatts. Spain uses 31.4 gigawatts. Bitcoin uses around 32 gigawatts. So if you think of Bitcoin as just a digital money, I think you miss the boat. And it's fine. Like, there's plenty of people that's what it's for, and that's awesome. Like, again, I try to be as soft as I can. Everyone has their own opinion. Everyone has their own way of living, their own decisions to make. You want to own Ethereum, XRP, all these other things for whatever reason. Awesome. Just have a little Bitcoin. Like, just have some of it. Hold on to it. I'm a Bitcoin only guy. But for me, when I look at these things, I just had a conference where I got half of a room of people who are big Ethereum people. I'm like, maybe 10% of it should be in Bitcoin. Like, just maybe in case it catches on after countries buy it. So your thesis going through this is really about sovereignty. Like, that's really the purpose. So explain to everyone out there, what makes Bitcoin different based on sovereignty? Like, what makes it different from any of the other altcoins that are out there, which, by the way, by definition, are alternatives to Bitcoin. That is an altcoin. It is not Bitcoin by definition. What separates the two classes?
Yeah, and I love this question because I like to compare it to our current state of government. Okay, and so people don't understand the system of law they live in, which is called proof of stake. Okay, and so if you think about it, there's about say 1,000 people in Washington, right, that make the laws for 330 million of us that live here. Okay, and so 1,000 people. That means you only have to get 51% of that 1,000 people to collude, right? And if you can get 51% of those people to collude, which is not hard when you have a money printer, you can enact any law you want. You just have to, give earmarks, right, to these different districts for your favorite congressman to then be like, you know what, I'm going to sign on to this. And then you get the next guy, I'm going to sign on to this. And you just give them money. And you pretty much have the entire world in your hands, especially if you have control of the United States. Because you had famous quotes by what I think it was Rothschild that, if you give me control of a nation's money, I care not who makes its laws, to where it doesn't matter who you put into office, because a small group of people can make changes that affect everybody else. And so that's what I want people to really understand, right? Like, if you're in a system, a consensual system, and you're giving your power away to a small group of individuals, there's no way they can represent all of your wants and needs, especially with the dilution of our representation, because they stopped the number of representatives in 1933, of course. And so what that means is that our democracy, if you want to call it that, has been diluted since 1933 because we're stuck at 435 congressmen.
Right.
And
Good
so
point.
if you think of Bitcoin as this new apparatus of government, you remove this small group of people from being able to make new laws in this system. Okay. And so we talk about Bitcoin being this thermodynamically sound rule of law, in a sense, because it's rules of law written in code instead of on pieces of paper. Okay. These are rules of law written in code in cyberspace, and the law cannot be changed very easily. It's very difficult to make new rules, and there's very certain rules with Bitcoin, right? It's 21 million coins, and the halving schedule, inflation schedule, subsidy schedule, whatever you want to call it, is set in stone. SHA-256, the difficulty adjustment every 2 weeks, like those main architectural pieces of Bitcoin will never be changed. And that's because you're never going to get a bunch of people to agree to sabotage their own investments, right? But it's easy when you have a small group of people sabotaging things, because, by the time some of the stuff they do has been implemented, like, those people are out of office anyway. They don't give a shit. And, they don't really have to live with the consequences of it. But, the people that get latched onto Bitcoin understand these different aspects. And so that's why people have to look at the architecture and the basic fundamentals and compare it to like a system of government, because the money part is like the boring part. But when you look at Bitcoin as like this global, scalable governance platform to where individuals have direct legislation, okay, you have direct legislative powers. You no longer need to elect individuals to implement laws and that sort of thing. You can enact your own direct representation by just running your own node. In essence, you're a legislature, because you're reinforcing the laws that are already out there by running a node.
$300 for $300, you can become your own congressman in a money system.
Exactly. And that adds decentralization. That adds more congressmen to the pool, right? Imagine having to, get, let's say, 500,000 congressmen to agree to change something, right? It's
never
probably
going to
be
happen.
Pretty hard.
Yeah.
Never going to happen. That's a good thing. People think, we need to have all these laws on the books. And, I'd say 99% of them probably aren't even used, but they're used as a fear tactic, as a tactic to keep us enslaved, so that we'll never truly, realize. And so if we keep pulling that, we have a direct representation. So we have direct representation via our nodes. We have the miners, which is like our power projectors, right?
Yep.
We are paying a fee to protect our access to cyberspace. And we're doing that by paying a fee to these different miners, just like we pay our military, right, to secure our property.
But they're not paid in that right. So for those who are new to Bitcoin or altcoins, what G's talking about is proof of stake. So there's really three models of cryptocurrency. One is proof of work, which Bitcoin is not the only, but the most robust. There's Litecoin, there's Dogecoin, there's other proof of work. In proof of work, the way it works is you've got to actually invest in some machinery. You've got to invest in energy. You've got to power your machine. You've got to run calculations. I have a video for you guys. I'll keep it short, but essentially your average Bitcoin miner, a high-powered S21 Pro unit, is going to make 200 to 300 million guesses at an algorithm every second. These are happening millions of times around the world. Eventually, one of them solves the problem, and they are allowed to then become quality control. So quality control, like in a factory, you have a block, and that block is being filled with transactions, like a packaging box is filled with goods. And then essentially the one who wins the block, who actually solves the equation, he's pulling it down, verifying there's no double spend, no counterfeit Bitcoin, no nothing else. And then it goes to the node holders, who are quality assurance, who double verify that everything is legitimate. Then it goes on the blockchain, on the assembly line, out the factory forever, and they get paid 3.125 Bitcoin for that. By the way, super exciting, in the last couple of weeks, there have been 3 solo miners who have hit full blocks. So somebody running a $200 unit in their home just made $350,000 by running a computer for about $3 a month in energy. Then proof of stake is different. So in proof of work, you've got to have basically control of the hash, which is 800 exahash. And again, if you added every major technology company in the world, they'd come to about 3 or 4% of that computing power. It's no way that Google and Apple could collude to take it over. It would cost you probably $1 trillion to change Bitcoin for 10 minutes at best. So in that network, it's very hard to get to a 51% attack. I mean, literally $1 trillion. Proof of stake is different. So in Bitcoin, you have to solve a block. The network pays the miner. So he had to earn it. He had to prove he did work to actually receive something. In proof of stake, they're just minted like the Federal Reserve. You're just pushing a button. There's 100 billion, 200 trillion, however many coins you want to make. And then you give some to the VCs who paid for you to build the platform. You give some to your board of directors. You give some to the executives. You give some to new hires, new recruits, new developers. And then they have all this free money that they build a market for. And then that market ends up buying from them primarily. So they cash out on you. And ultimately, if you just controlled 51% of the tokens in that platform, you essentially control the governance. So if you're confused about that, that's the difference. Do you want to earn your way into influence, or do you want to buy your way into influence? Either way, influence is accrued between one of those two manners in crypto. Proof of work, very difficult, very expensive. Proof of stake is already in play in 98% of all altcoins out there. So sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure we get a little education here for folks.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's the key element too, is it's a global competition. And in essence, Bitcoin is monetized energy. And if you keep thinking about what that means, is that we've incentivized the entire world to produce the cheapest amount of energy, to hash this network,
That's key.
to reward yourselves. And so countries like Niger that still mines gold for the French franc that the French don't even use, right? Could say, you know what, we're just going to mine Bitcoin. Why are we working for you guys anymore? We don't need your currency. And it's so, you know, we don't have to sanction countries and then cut them off of banking to where we literally control everything that they do, right? I don't believe that we should have the ultimate authority to tell nations what to do by controlling their pocketbooks. And so we already have like a one world quasi currency, which is the dollar.
Correct.
But in that system, right, like we have sanction powers, we're able to cut people off. And, you know, if bad people get a control of that apparatus, you know, bad things can happen to people where you're saying, writing a tweet one day, and next thing you get kicked off the banking system. Debanking has happened in the United States. You know, Barron Trump was kicked off. Kanye was kicked off. Now, you might not agree with what these individuals have to say,
but they have the right to say it.
They have the right to say it. And, you know, money is used as a weapon for these folks to do that. But what's even greater about the monetization of energy in that regard is that you get non-voluntary cooperation through nation states. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you just keep, you know, pulling that thread and seeing where it goes, you know, you get to the end of where, you know, Bitcoin actually can end wars, right? In this kinetic stalemate that we're in currently, where you get competing nations like Russia, China, and the US, and, you know, their productive economies alone will increase the value of your Bitcoin just from the thermodynamic qualities of that system. And so what that means is that, like, it actually costs you more to attack them because you're attacking the own value of your own energy, right? Your own Bitcoin.
That's right. You're hurting yourself by hurting the enemy.
Yeah. And so it doesn't make sense. You know, it doesn't make sense to actually drop bombs on people to, at some degree. I'm not talking about like next week. I'm talking about, you know, years into the future here. You get operational, non-voluntary cooperation to where different countries, different societies, different cultures can actually protect themselves. Like, we don't have to agree with what they're doing in their country, but we shouldn't be telling them what to do. And so now we have this, you know, it kind of sounds like puppy dogs and unicorns and all that good stuff, but like maybe one day we get maybe somewhat close to that, to where sovereignty and freedom can basically coexist in different nations like we have in America to some degree, to where we don't have to always like force our own America on them. They can have their own little freedom, you know, world, whatever that culture wants, but they get to dictate. And they get to dictate that through the conservation and protection of their energy through this amazing technology.
When you bring up two good points, and I'm going to put this into the context of, you know, I'm online a lot. I'm not really that active. I'm just a lurker most of the time, and I do podcasts and speak. I find it way more beneficial to talk to you than to like follow and post and comment. And I love people who do. Now, online, there's a huge debate online and in DC if there is to be a nation state stockpile of anything in digital assets. And from everything that I've read and seen, and I'm pretty good at this stuff, digital assets to our government at the moment means Bitcoin, stablecoins, and tokenization. That's kind of the three areas that they're talking about. Not saying that that's what's happening, but that's what they're mentioning. Now, in that conversation, it's which ones should the nation stock? Why would a nation stockpile tokenized dollars? You can just print it, so hold it in the bank, right? It makes no sense. Tokenized assets for military contracts, I can totally see that. Bitcoin, I can see it because it's sovereign and global. There is no CEO. There's no one in charge. There's no way to humanly influence the network. It has to be done through military force, energetic power projection, or it has to be done through monetary means at a grand scale. So an uncrackable egg. Now, when you mentioned something very crucial there, is that the energy innovation is the big thing. So this is, I'm gonna pour this on you. Here is my, and I haven't done this online. Here's my, if I'm gonna pitch to Washington, D.C. why Bitcoin should be in a strategic stockpile, the thing you're gonna see online is, oh, the Bitcoiners want to pump their bags. That's what's called psychological projection of altcoins, who literally do that every day. Every time you buy an altcoin, you're buying it from the company, okay? They made it, they minted it, they did it for nothing, and you're buying it. On the other hand, I always look at this thing and say, if we're going to do digital assets, tokenized assets, which we're going to get into in a moment, those make sense because you're just basically protecting the rights of ownership to a physical asset. That makes sense. But Bitcoin unto itself is the only digital asset that actually breaches real world utility. Now, we hear this all the time. It's slow, it's whatever. Lightning Network is, I just met with the team in Austin. You're talking about a millisecond to make a transaction for less than a penny, and it really doesn't matter how much you're spending. It's going to be the next Visa and MasterCard on layer 2, which will provide some centralization. But layer 2, Bitcoin, Lightning is still more decentralized than 99.999% of altcoins. Like, it's important to understand 25,000 nodes are running on a layer 2. That's an incredible number. However, Bitcoin breaches utility. Bitcoin miners, I see the stuff popping up where in 2021, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. 2021, Elon Musk put a tweet out, a power plant goes out in China and 30% of the hash rate goes down, very decentralized. By the way, he said that 3 months after he bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. So a lot of wealthy people, Jamie Dimon's notorious for talking trash about Bitcoin and then running a Bitcoin ownership fund in Europe. You are being psychologically operated on every moment of your life, especially when it comes to money. But Bitcoin by itself, the true utility of Bitcoin, you hear store of value. Okay, everything is a store of value to those who believe in it. Like that, so it is a terrible term. Is it a medium of exchange? Kinda. I've bought things in Bitcoin. A friend of mine's a realtor. He just sold a house. It was paid completely in Bitcoin. I've talked to 3 banks that are collateralizing loans with Bitcoin. So you're going to have to hold Bitcoin to get a loan. That's actually a medium of exchange, not just a store of value. It's used in a transaction as collateral. So it's already there. The big thing people aren't seeing is that when Elon made that tweet in 2021, within a matter of a year, the hash rate shifted to the United States, almost 40%, which is too much. That's not decentralized if we're doing 40%, but we're about 28% of the hash rate right now globally comes from the US. And I think about a half of that comes from my state of Texas. So we have gotten very friendly to Bitcoin mining. And I bring up Texas because this is the bridge to real world utility. When I moved here in late December 2020, by February of 2021, my power was flickering for 3 weeks because it dropped down to like 6 degrees with snow and ice. We had wind power. We have a 78-year-old grid. Because we opened the doors to Bitcoin miners, there have been 0 electrical challenges within Texas with ERCOT. I just met with the senator who wrote this bill, and he said that our first primary function was to go to the PPA, power purchase agreement, Bitcoin miners, and have them up their game. So Bitcoin miners are buying excess energy, and when energy depletes on the grid, they're selling it back. Like, that is a useful term to balance any grid. Then you have Elon Musk saying, I think in 23 or 22, well, Bitcoin needs to get more energy efficient and green. Like Elon, I feel like Elon's guiding Bitcoin miners to fit into the world. So what happened after that? Now 61% of all energy used to mine Bitcoin, again, 30 gigawatts of power decentralized around the world, comes from renewable energies. Project I have in Knoxville is 100% flare gas. 100% of what we're mining, 8.3 megawatts worth of power, that would have been burned off into the atmosphere. And now our investors get tax credits and revenue. And now we're mining Bitcoin like that. This is the innovation, the bridge to the real world. We could not be having a legitimate discussion about artificial intelligence rollouts without the innovations, the creativity of Bitcoin miners in the real world, using energy no one wanted or needed, or computing units nobody wanted and needed, because early on the GPUs were running the entire system, just a normal laptop. If without that forced innovation by a group of people, and I think Trump put it very well in Nashville, he said, Bitcoin is an achievement, a modern marvel of human cooperation and achievement. People oftentimes look at Bitcoiners and say they're greedy guys who want to make all this money. We're nerdy guys who are trying to find more creative ways to screw the system, create sovereignty, and create energy efficiency so that everyone can actually have this type of freedom without, as you use all the time on your page, without God King influence in our life, without being domesticated by the world. So I think that these topics are really important for people to understand. And again, if you've noticed, we've been on for 34 minutes. We haven't trashed anyone doing this. We love Bitcoin, okay? And we didn't come to loving Bitcoin because we follow Michael Saylor. I disagree with like half of what he's doing, and that's okay. We can do that. Bitcoiners are the only tribe I see online that challenge each other instead of just making bad posts about Bitcoin to sell you their altcoin. Like, that's the most common tactic in a psychological operation. Like, you're a businessman, I am too. Someone comes to my office and they say, hey, I want to raise $50 million. Can you help me with this project? If they spend more than 10% of their time bashing their competitor, I kick them out. Like, talk to me about what you love. Like, if we focus in on the things that we love, then we'll find the truth. So are you seeing the same thing? Because Bitcoiners are the most creative, innovative energy people ever. And this bridge to AI, Like, think of really statistically, you talked about Trump putting together the Treasury and the Fed, which is true. The other thing that you're missing in there is that he actually appointed BlackRock as the asset manager, who is now the biggest Bitcoiner in the world. And they use that against, and psychological operations against Bitcoin, saying BlackRock's buying all this Bitcoin. BlackRock doesn't own a single Bitcoin. Their clients own Bitcoin. And now you're starting to see Fidelity and some of these other places that are allowing for in-kind redemption. So you can buy Bitcoin through Fidelity, cash out of the ETF, and they're gonna transfer Bitcoin into a cold wallet for you. This is an entire system, in my opinion, an entire system of grand scale adoption and energy efficiency that'll lead us into an AI evolved government or financial network. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of camouflage out there that will make certain events look good or bad depending on your filter, but with the ultimate goal, like if BlackRock gets involved, if these people get involved, like at the end of the day, they still lose, right? They lose all that power and influence. So they're adopting it as just accelerating their demise in that degree because this new system gives everybody an equal playing field. Just because BlackRock or supposedly their clients own this amount of Bitcoin does not give them any extraordinary power over the network, right? And
Good
so,
point.
we have to make sure that we understand that just because, Satoshi has 1.1 million coins doesn't mean that he gets to come in and change any rules of law. Those are separate, right? And that's where proof of stake is different, where if you own more coins, you have a lot more power over the network to do things that other people might not like. And so we like to keep everybody, no matter how much wealth you have, right, on an even playing field. And this is what stirs competition, because you got to have global competition. You cannot let the people that are born into money always have the upper hand, because that's just not fair, right? That's not a
Right.
natural law way of how this world has functioned, right? Animals and species and the entire evolution, if you believe in that, right? Species have evolved over time and adapted. They've had to adapt to their environment in order to survive. And we're kind of going through this global natural selection filter of humanity to figure out like which ones are going to adapt this new system, because they are going to be the ones with more, let's say, power and influence over the new world that we create, right? Are we going to create a world of scarcity and control, or are we going to build a world of freedom and sovereignty, so that we give everybody, a better chance at life? And so, yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that. And I think people need to realize that things are happening at a rapid pace now. Like you are running out of time to front run governments and global nation states, because Trump has given you a very big head start, right, with his talk at Nashville, to where he's saying we need a Bitcoin stockpile. And he used stockpile, which is a definite different term than reserve.
Military term, yeah.
Of weaponry. And so I think people need to really understand that he's trying to help as many of you as possible. And even getting into shitcoins. If you get into a shitcoin, that is your bridge to Bitcoin. That is your gateway drug to Bitcoin once you understand money, right? Because understanding a shitcoin is a lot like understanding the dollar. Is a lot like understanding our proof of stake government. And so finding those things to compare them to is great, because your mind can then start to distinguish why Bitcoin is better.
And that's a great differentiator, is that you could own, it doesn't matter how much anyone owns. Like I can look at any of the top 10 altcoins in the space. And in any of them, some of them, 71 or 72% of all the coins are owned by the top 100 wallets. So like, it doesn't matter. They're always in control of the network. The illusion is decentralization. But when 71% is owned by 100 people who probably know each other in real life, who could collude at any time to change, that's a scary thing. That's like the US government just changing monetary policy or changing a law that hurts you. In Bitcoin, I did this research before we talked here. I think in the top 100 wallets owns 13.4% of all Bitcoin. That's a much lower number than 71%. But it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you own. You have no influence over Bitcoin. Proof of stake is all about he who owns the most makes the rules. It is literally designed by that feature.
Well, not only that, but he who owns the most coins gets more coins, right? The only people that like you don't have to hold any coins to plug in a Bitcoin miner and start mining the protocol, right?
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to start offering those here. I just talked to a couple groups that do home miners. Everyone should run one. It's just an interesting thing to do at home. And again, three people in the last 2 weeks have hit full blocks. So they've made they went from nothing to 3.125 Bitcoin in the blink of an eye and had to do nothing but plug in a machine.
Stop buying lottery tickets. Buy a Bitcoin miner.
Absolutely, yeah, for like $185. I mean, these things aren't even that expensive, and you hook them up in 5 minutes. If you hate Bitcoin and you want to own an altcoin, just run a miner. At least that way you're adding it to your stack. Maybe, I mean, there's a very good chance you never mine any Bitcoin. Also, just to be frank, but I think it's important to understand. Like, I love the conversation we've had. The Treasury, the Fed, BlackRock as an asset manager, Coin, which was one of the things when I first found you online, I was kind of blown away at. I'd never heard that before. The Trump thing validated by Lutnick. Speaking of Lutnick, let's get into Tether. Like, this is one of the best conversations because I was a Tether hater because I know one of the people who created it, who I don't think anyone actually likes in real life, and everyone who's met him. I'll keep his name out of it because I'm not that guy. But when I started looking into Tether, I didn't pay attention to stable coins when I first got into crypto. It was all kind of figuring out which quote unquote currency, which I think there's really actually one. But when I started looking at other currencies, I didn't really pay attention to a stable coin. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically a digital dollar. It's just it just keeps everything at $1. And they buy treasuries to do that. And Tether is this gigantic conspiracy theory that Tether is driving the price of Bitcoin, that they're the only people in the world who buy Bitcoin. They're a corrupt organization and all this other stuff. And I bought into it. Like, I'll be frank. I just said, okay, well, they're a dirty organization because everyone said they're dirty, right? So when I did my own research and I started looking through Paulo and I started calling people I know who know Paulo, overwhelmingly, I heard this is the smartest guy in the entire crypto space. And I'm like, what? So yeah, they acetate. They basically give you, here's our audit. It's not officially audited by a third party. But Howard Lutnick at Cantor Fitzgerald in Nashville 2024, he came out on stage, look it up, Bitcoin 2024, Howard Lutnick. He basically said, I'm the guy who audited them. They have every penny that they have. When I heard him say that, I really dug into Tether. And what I found out is that Tether is the 19th largest buyer of US treasuries, making them the 19th most important partner of the United States, because that's our business, is selling our debt. That's what the country does. And then I started seeing, well, they're delisted in Europe. Okay, cool. I spoke with the guy who was one of the advisors to the MiCA compliance laws of Europe. And the MiCA compliance laws are basically telling these stable coins, if you want to operate a compliant stable coin in Europe, 60% of your dollar backing or your euro backing in Europe has to be held in a European bank, earning 0.25%. So Tether had 13.5 billion. They made more money than BlackRock last year by buying U.S. treasuries to cover their dollar match for the stable coin, and then they take their profits and they buy Bitcoin. That is literally what the company does. And now they're investing in Brazilian energy companies that are using waste energy to mine more Bitcoin. And the head of the commerce in this entire country is a huge advocate of Bitcoin and Tether. But the market, especially Twitter just tells you, look, they minted 1 billion Tether. Now look at the price of Bitcoin. That happens with everything because it's what's called an on and off ramp. So if you're bringing cash into the system, you're going to put it into Tether and you're going to make your Bitcoin purchase through Tether. They're anticipating new purchases and minting to accommodate that, which is what literally every stable coin on planet Earth does it. But why does Tether have this bad rap, GMoney? Why? What is going on? Can you defend them, or do you not like them? Where are you at on Tether?
Yeah, and I always, again, back to the conspiracy stuff. Like, you always have to look at who screams the loudest. Like, sure. Again, back to your point of who you're attacking. Like, who is attacking Tether, right? And every 99 times out of 100, it's usually an altcoin shitcoiner who is like an XRP guy. That's their main argument, right? Like, oh, Tether can't be audited or this and that. And so
who made their own stable coin, and they're now hoping that what they accuse Tether of doing will help pump their bags. I always find that to be the most hilarious thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think there was probably some good reason for some of that uncertainty before.
Sure.
But yeah, like you said, the new CEO, they're moving their headquarters to El Salvador, right? As you said, Lutnick did the audit. You have him, and I think he invested 5% of his own money into Tether as well.
No,
or he owns 5% or something.
Cantor Fitzgerald made a $600 million convertible loan.
Oh, okay.
So currently they owe Cantor Fitzgerald $600 million, not Lutnick. He owns zero. But Cantor Fitzgerald, I've been in business a long time. I've never seen a convertible note not convert. So eventually they will have equity in the company.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. And so I think people have to pick that up as signal. Like, this is going to, the dollar is probably going to be still used a lot of the time but it's going to be used in a crypto way that's somewhat, public and transparent. People will be able to know how many dollars are sitting out there. And with new integrations, like they're going to be integrating Lightning Network, all very, very huge for the entire Bitcoin ecosystem to have easy, fast payments at very, very low cost, if not zero cost, for everybody. And so, and another thing that I looked at too is that, like, we talk about this dollar milkshake theory, to where, other countries around the world didn't really have access to dollars. It was hard for them to get dollars, but these people could get Tether, actually. And so if you're in a poor country and you are trying to buy dollars, a lot of the different regulations they have, that it would actually be really hard to acquire dollars. And so what this allowed people to do in other countries was actually get some access to dollars to save some of their energy, because their native currency was going to zero a lot quicker, right? Everything was basically getting lumped into the dollar. And so people were able to actually hedge some of that inflation risk through just buying dollars, as being that currency. And so, I think Tether is a global positive for Bitcoin. And we're not going to be, buying Bitcoin, using our Bitcoin to buy coffee, in a sense, right, on a worldwide basis. Eventually,
I think it's a ridiculous claim that anyone's ever made. No, why would you ever? It's Gresham's law. Like, why would you ever use good money to buy a bad product? It doesn't.
Yeah, but I use Lightning and I buy it. I try to support people that use that are accepting Bitcoin.
Me too. I bought pizza 2 weeks ago with Lightning. Love it.
Right. Exactly. And so I try to use it as much as I can, and then I go back and buy those sats back if I have to, or whatever. And so putting and using Bitcoin as a form of currency is also a great thing. It's just in the end, Bitcoin is more than just money, and that's what's exciting about it.
Yeah, when I met with the Lightning guys, like their business development team, so not like the heads or anything, but when I met with them and I talked to them about Tether, because we were there with Bitcoin core developers. So one of the most here's another fascinating tip about Bitcoin that makes it different. It's Thursday night, a normal week in February, and there's 70 people a Thursday night at 7 o'clock who literally code for free. They do not get paid to work on Bitcoin, that are all sitting there in a developer meeting, listening to the people from Lightning on how to integrate payments. And which is fascinating, because I looked it up. There were 47 other Bitcoin developer meetups that day in America. So if they all had 70 people, you're looking at a couple thousand people contributing to a decentralized network totally for free, because they love what it's doing. And the Lightning guys said, one of the developers said, well, is this going to centralize Bitcoin? And he's like, no, because Tether isn't Bitcoin. Tether owns Bitcoin, and that's why they're profitable. But it's just another currency. He made a great analogy. He said, Visa and MasterCard accept 148 different currencies. So you can transact in anything around the world. We only accept one. So if you want to have a better decentralized payment processor, which is what Lightning is, then they needed to add another currency. So they added the largest stable coin with the best track record. And of course, they peg and depeg for a fraction of a penny every minute. That's how balancing the dollar works. But they're also the 19th largest business partner of the United States in the treasury business, funded through Cantor Fitzgerald. So I want to get that out there. Tether is a great conversation. Let's get into stable coins, because what I'm trying to do with UG is kind of like pull in the stuff I see on Twitter, and how do we like articulate this to people in a nice way, so we're not slinging mud from behind a screen somewhere. One of the other conspiracy theories you hear out there all the time, which is usually an altcoiner, fear and greed is what sells money. I've been selling money my whole life. I want to make you fearful of one investment to get you into mine. It's just how it works. Bitcoin does it too. Bitcoiners say the dollar's going to zero. Don't buy gold. Buy gold. If you like gold and you don't want to lose money, buy gold. If you're a gold person and you want to make higher returns, buy Bitcoin. Mix the two together. Hold a portfolio of things that you enjoy. It's your money. It's your life. But in the middle of all this, you have this whole centralization, decentralization, layer 2 conversation, which again, there's 24,000 nodes on Lightning. There are not that many nodes on any other network outside of Bitcoin in the world. So clearly some centralization, but not much. So you have these developers asking that question to these guys. So we added a stable coin, right? Which every stable coin, the average person out there next week, maybe I'll get you back on if you have time, because I'm going to do an entire week long, every night of the week in March, explaining the different nuances of crypto in common person language. Because you and I could, before we got on air, we were rambling off all kinds of things that nobody will understand.
Right.
But in the middle of this, a stable coin, again, is a centralized feature. It is basically a company who buys treasuries and they use that treasury to ensure that their stablecoin is always valued at $1, that's what you're going to use for payments. You're not going to, Bitcoin's not going to be used for coffee. Nothing's going to be used for coffee. You're going to use a stablecoin. That's just kind of the way the world works. But a stablecoin by itself is fully centralized, right? That, like, this, stablecoins are the best way to explain this. If I'm buying US treasuries and the US doesn't like what I'm doing, they're going to stop selling me treasuries and I no longer have a stablecoin. They're centralized, they're controlled, they're programmable. You could certainly in the back of it build in, you know, any sort of geo-fencing. So if I didn't like what GMoney was saying on Twitter and he lives in California, I could basically in the back door say you can't spend your stablecoin outside of California. What's the difference between a CBDC and a stablecoin?
Not much. I mean, you know, stable coins, you know, you had the Luna blow up, of course. And so
Huge
some
blow
of
up.
these guys will attempt to, again, get your Bitcoin and then introduce their own shitcoin. And then they basically leverage the Bitcoin that they have to attempt to outsmart the market. But at the end of the day, like, these different frauds get exposed. And the problem is that when they get exposed, all the people that bought into it lose a lot of money, you know. And so it's sad, but you know, rug pulls are a painful way to start learning what is money.
Yeah,
And
did you learn how to ride your bike without skinning your knee?
yeah, no, right?
Right.
Like, you know, there's pain and there's effort, there's blood, sweat, and tears that go into it. And so learning about the difference between these different monetary systems is important. Now that doesn't mean like some of these things will have huge highs for a very short time, but eventually they're all going to go to zero against Bitcoin. And you know, these other different stable coins, as you put it, they realize that Tether is a big threat because they are basically swallowing a large chunk of the entire network. And so I don't even, you know, the Coinbase Circle One and some other ones that they've tried to attempt to inject are, you know, I think they're going to lose at some point because they're just not
Absolutely.
implemented as well as Tether has done. But again, if you're going to believe the FUD, if you're going to be scared of everything and not actually look at what's happening, you know, eventually you're going to regret not putting in a little bit of extra homework into, you know, believing everything you see without peeling behind the curtains a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you answered that perfectly. Like, what's the difference between a stable coin and a CBDC? The name.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. You just remove CB and you still have a DC, and now it's a US Treasury digital currency. That's really all it is. So that is being implemented on you, whether you like it or not. The US dollar will be expanded through the global south, through all the third world nations, because they're all already using Tether. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of crypto in general, is that it has banked the unbanked, and no one's banked the unbanked more than Bitcoin has, because I think about 30% of payments in half of African countries run on old school cell phones transferring Bitcoin as we speak. So Americans kind of look at the Bitcoin evolution in America and aren't really realizing that it's truly revolutionizing third world, especially through mining. They didn't have electricity or running water until somebody wanted to pay for a power plant and pay the power plant to mine Bitcoin. Now you have Africans with electricity and running water. Like, these things are happening everywhere. Let's get into tokenization. I want to wrap this up because I don't want to take too much of your time today. Tokenization, walk us through that. You've been talking about XCP for a very long time. You've got Pepe's out there, which most people don't understand. I'll probably put myself in that category. I don't have a Pepe because I don't, it's not really my investment thesis. But run us through, what is tokenization as simple as you can. I'm going to do this with you because I was just at a conference where everyone asked me about tokenization. Nobody asked me about Bitcoin, which was, by the way, the first and most largest still tokenized asset in the world. Everyone who hates Bitcoin realize Bitcoin is the first and most tokenized asset in the world as we speak today. So give us a rundown. Tokenization. I know that you know it's coming. A lot of Bitcoiners want to resist it. I'm one of those because I see more of the danger in tokenization than the positive. So I want to walk through that with you as we wrap it up.
100%. You know, and I always look at it, what problem are we trying to solve? What area of corruption would tokenization solve? Okay. And so, you know, the glaring hole is it's Wall Street. Okay. Wall Street operates in a rigged market with hours of operation, market makers, and what do they call that? The circuit breaker.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In true capitalist society, do you think they have circuit breakers? No. But we look at what happened with GameStop. We look at naked short selling. Okay. There's a term out there called securities lending. Have you ever heard of that, Eric? Securities
Yes.
lending. Okay.
Yes.
So that is the rehypothecation of your stocks, right? That allows hedge funds to basically go out and locate. They don't actually have to take custody of the actual stock. They just locate it, and so a big firm like BlackRock or certain other individuals can essentially lend out this same share of stock 20x over, right? And that's why I think the float of GameStop was higher than the actual like issued number of shares of stock.
Like 1.5x. Yeah, it was huge.
Right. And so how does that work? And so, they're able to manipulate the market. These different short sellers are basically taking out risks where they don't actually have the actual custody of that of that share of stock. Do you have any shares of stock that you custody, Eric?
No, because Seed & Co. at the DTCC owns it all. I already have tokenized stocked. It's already tokenized.
Yeah, and so what people don't know, in addition to that, is that 80% of the net profit from Wall Street comes from securities lending. Literally, it's a house of cards. There is no other centralized group of profit that comes from the rehypothecation of equities. And so if you think about what money problem are we trying to solve with Bitcoin, we're trying to solve the rehypothecation of fake money out there in the world with the banking system.
And fake gold. We're watching that be unveiled right now before our eyes.
Yeah, we're seeing the lease rates of gold go through the roof because people are trying to puff their books, and there's rehypothecating it, lending it overnight so people can look stable or liquid when in fact they're just renting it. They don't actually own it. And that's in essence what's happening on Wall Street. And so what happens if you trickle down, it's an extra tax on us, because what service are these people providing? They're stealing from you through lending out your asset. Technically, you don't really have full control over that. You can't own it. So really, you don't own that share of stock. You own a beneficiary amount or title to that thing, to where you don't actually own full allodial title to take custody of it, so that other people can't sell it on your behalf. Okay.
If they were honest, they'd call it rights to price action. That's really what it is. It's just rights to price action. You don't own anything.
And so what we're able to do with tokenization is we're able to actually take this system that's very secret, that hasn't been upgraded in a very, very long time, and we're able to give full transparency to this system of equities. Okay. Now, don't take my word for it. Now, I've been screaming about this for years, but most recently, Michael Saylor came out and said, look, the capital markets are essentially the foundation to a strong currency. The capital markets are only able to be accessed by a 0.4% of the entire world, which means we're not in a capitalist system where anybody can raise capital. And allowing tokenization allows individuals to basically offer their innovation, their company, their capital, whatever you want, to the entire world, right? They can have instant global access to capital markets, to the entire globe, by tokenizing maybe their company, maybe an idea. And that's what I think is happening with Trump issuing his own coin, and you have Malay and all these other people. I think they're really trying to force tokenization down your throat, because everything will eventually get tokenized. Now, I'm not talking about layer one and we're installing JPEGs on layer one. That's not it at all. So we understand the problem it solves, right? We're understanding it solves the
transparency.
It's a transparent system to where, look, I can go and I can cryptographically prove, right, that Eric has this many shares of stock, and that BlackRock I can see own this many shares of stock. And then at the end of the day, like, I can trade a stock with Eric directly. I don't need to go through a middleman anymore. So it gets rid of the third party as well. And so we got to figure out, what does that system look like at some point? Like, if we can trade energy point to point, we should be able to trade equities peer to peer, right? In that system. And so there's only one protocol out there from a Bitcoin maximalist standpoint that offers a thermodynamically sound solution that is scalable. Okay. And that is this token called XCP. Now everybody goes, oh my gosh, GMoney shitcoining and blah, blah. No, like it's actually built upon thermodynamics. And if you understand, again, we're coming back to the architecture of how this protocol was actually built. Okay. You go back to 2014. And yes, there is a shitcoin attached to it. XCP is the name of the coin. But in essence, there was no ICO, meaning there was no group that offered this coin for sale on the open market. It was, if you sent your Bitcoin to a provably unspendable Bitcoin address, you were rewarded with this token, XCP. And the reason there was a token is because there's certain things Bitcoin can't do, like escrowing and like other things. And so people go, why do they need a token? Well, there's an anti-spam filter and some other stuff built in that you need this extra token to do certain things. And so what happened was, for a period of like 3 or 4 months, people were able to send Bitcoin to this provably unspendable Bitcoin address and then rewarded with this this token called XCP. Now, about 2,140 Bitcoin were burned. That created a supply of around, I think, 2 million of these XCP tokens. Okay. And so what's great and unique about these XCP tokens is that you can create a named asset, right? Like a, vanity, like a domain name, to where you actually have ownership of this token that is anchored in layer 1. What I mean by that is it runs on layer 2, op return, to where the hash is actually stored in layer 1, but everything operates on layer 2. So we're not, putting JPEGs on layer 1. We're not storing extra data that doesn't need to be there. We're literally using the data field in Bitcoin as it was intended to use, right? It's how Lightning uses op return, right?
Yep.
They put their hash function in the layer 1 to secure escrow and basically tie that Bitcoin up for a certain amount of time. And so it's a very similar thing, but again, it's got this immaculate conception, right? To where energy cannot be created or destroyed. So even though the Bitcoin is sent to a provably unspendable Bitcoin address, the Bitcoin is sitting there. You can go look at it right now and see 2,140 Bitcoin that no one's ever moved it since 2014. And so when you think about thermodynamics, is that energy is not destroyed, it's been converted. And we think about what does that conversion look like? Well, say you used firewood to burn something, maybe create a sword, right? Well, that spent energy of the wood is gone, but you have this new item like a sword or whatever you want that has been transformed. The energy has been transformed into this other system. And I think people really need to understand what that means. Now, if you go and look at my Covfefe dig and all the different mathematical proofs I have that tie in, like the games of Trump, this card right here, and some other things, you realize why Trump has pushed NFTs so hard and that they look like a cute little game of baseball cards. And I get it. Like, that's the catch. And that's obviously, getting people excited and this and that, but it's onboarding tokenization to everybody. And then not only that, but it's actually beta testing the new stock market, right? We're making sure that this second layer system can, in essence, basically support peer-to-peer equity transactions. Individuals will have the right to create their own instant access to capital markets. And if you keep, pulling this thread, like, eventually, it may be too expensive to operate natively on Bitcoin, right?
Sure.
And we're going to have to, at some point, with AI getting so good that I won't be able to tell Eric if that's really you behind that camera. Like, I'll be like, hey, Eric, like, hey, send me a signature from your address, knowing I know it's you. And tokenization, I believe, will provide proof of real. So individuals can prove their identity through tokenization, through these other layers. But it also does something also very special, because we talk about how taxation is theft. Okay.
100%.
And in our proof of stake ledger that we live in, your house lives on the state ledger, right? Your county recorder's office, IRS can come in and just slap a lien on your house, and there's no way for you to protect that. Like, you're on the state's ledger, Eric, right? You have no power. Now you can go to the courts.
Get me off this thing, G. Get me off.
You can go to the courts and try to fight it out there, but that's costly. And so what you have is you don't really own your property. Like, you don't own it.
Nope.
And if we keep pulling this thread, we can actually tokenize real estate. And what that means is that if you own a property, like, you own it and can cryptographically prove you own it, no other authority can come in and slap liens on something that you own. Okay. And so it opens up all these other doors to really immutable ownership of tokenization. Will have true ownership of your car, true ownership of your house, true ownership of things, to where no other entity can come in and slap liens on you or file fees or permissioned access to your property. It was really what it's about. It's about removing permissioned access to your property. And yes, I believe these rare Pepes are the start of that revolution. And like I said, the Covfefe dig, if you guys want to read it, it goes into all the mathematical proofs that actually tie all this together.
It's actually fascinating. I went through it. The one thing
what's crazy? I'll bring up one more thing of it, because
Please.
I've been using Grok, and I'm like feeding Grok all these different like proofs that I've been giving it, and been like, well, what are the odds of this? Because I'm not a mathematician. I don't know what the odds are. And I keep feeding it my research, and it's like, well, the odds are astronomically like really high in the hundreds of millions or trillions or septillions. And it's like, it's wild that the coincidences of my research is basically impossible odds for some of this stuff to happen. Again, back to the Q stuff, to where Bitcoin NFTs connected to Trump, connected to Q, connected to this entire operation to Bitcoin to save the world. And so, you know, I implore people to go check it out, and if it's interesting to them.
This is gonna, and it is interesting, by the way. So I'm one of those people. I read everything. I really cannot stand the people who are like, "Well, I know this, and I'm not gonna." I'm actually more interested in a different way of thinking constantly, because that's where I can pull good stuff from to get my own thought. One thing I've been confused about following you for a couple years, 315. Well, the 315. What is 315? I don't get it, and I've been waiting to ask you this question on camera for weeks. 315, break it down. It's in everything. I see it in everything you share, but what is the significance?
So 315 is Trump's Covfefe tweet. Okay. So if you take Trump tweeting Covfefe, he did it on May 31st. Okay. So when I want you to think of 315, I want you to think of combination of numbers of 315. It doesn't have to be 315. It could be 531, it could be 135. And so just think of it like a pattern, right? Just something that occurs in nature, maybe, but you see this pattern happen over and over again. And so what I noticed was, if you take Covfefe, C equals 3, O equals 15, V equals 22, 6565, you know, you get the whole string of just letters to numbers. Okay. And you start to extrapolate, what did those numbers mean? You get this weird coincidences that start popping up. For instance, Andrew Jackson. Okay. He was a guy that Trump first put in the Oval Office a portrait of.
Yep.
And we all know Andrew Jackson is famous for defeating the central bank. He killed the banks, literally. His birthday, funny enough, is March 15th. Okay. The 350, the Ides of March, the 315th day of the year is 11/11. Okay. And so what we get is kind of like this pattern of mathematical, let's call it frequency, right? And if you understand Nikola Tesla, he talked about the keys to the universe are in the numbers 369. And if you just take 369 and add them together, you get 3, 6 plus 9 equals 15. So maybe a 315 is actually a manifestation of Tesla. Okay. So this is where we get in a little bit esoteric realm, but
no, it's fun though. It's fun.
It is fun. And what you get is, you get, 11/11 was Armistice Day. It was the day to end all wars. It was the day of the treaty, right? To end all wars. And if we think of Bitcoin as this unifying signal to end all wars, we get this weird little 11/11 coincidences that happen out there. For instance, Michael Saylor, when he first bought Bitcoin, his average price averaged out to $11,111.11. You get JFK's executive order 11/11/0 was, done to rein in the power of the Fed and actually, remove interest from the equation, right? So you get his 11s. You get the first internet domain name ever registered was registered on March 15th. You get, funny enough, the original Rare Pepe sitting behind me there, that guy, the Nakamoto card. This guy was created and had a 315 inside the card itself. And so you just get these like over and over. And you have Trump. Well, actually, here's the other part of it. Trump first tweeted himself as Pepe the Frog on October 13th, 2015. Again, there's a 315 combination there. So what you get is just these multiple instances of 315. And I was like, this is just weird. I never wanted to come up with this stuff because I'm not a numerology guy. But at the end of the day, like, you get to this card over here called the Games of Trump, which is a super interesting card because it's a Bitcoin NFT minted on Bitcoin. We can go back and look at the blockchain and see when it was minted. The original supply was 1717. Okay. And in it, there's a 17 for shield and 17 for swords. Okay. And so you get all these 17s, and 17th letter of the alphabet is Q. Okay. And what we have is a Bitcoin NFT with Trump riding a dragon over fire called the Games of Trump, minted to Bitcoin 58 days before Q ever dropping anything. Okay. And so people may say, well, that's not really a lot. But if you think of the mathematical odds of someone doing that, it's pretty actually astronomical.
Yeah.
Like in the hundreds of millions type. And so I think of Bitcoiners as like mathematical maxis. Sure. And if I can guess a private key, like, it's probably not a very secure network, right? And so this is, I think, even maybe higher than guessing a private key. And so people can say it's coincidence, but we always know there's no such thing as coincidence, Eric. And so what I've tried to do is prove through mathematics that there are certain correlations in a greater plan of unifying the world through Bitcoin to eliminate the bank thugster, corrupt criminals from our system forever, and that we can live in peace and we can actually live on a new Bitcoin standard with freedom and sovereignty. And the 315 is like the key to unlock that extra esoteric realm in that equation. And look, there's way more proofs on that. Like, I'm just giving you a very small portion of it. You know, a great one is November 11th. Guess what happened on November 11th? Bitcoin had its largest day ever. It beat silver, which was JFK's executive order 11.11.0, right? It actually passed silver on 11.11 in kind of the hat tip to JFK. There's a 315 in the actual Genesis block. If you go look at the Genesis block, it's January 3rd, 10-15-15. So there's a 315. Like, it's literally everywhere. When you see the pattern and can pick it up, you can start to make the connections, but it is a fun rabbit hole for those that are there. But the mathematics speak for itself. Don't listen to me. Go throw it into Grok and go figure out what the mathematics
that is interesting.
I'm on Substack as Pappy G45, and so all the Substacks are listed there to go through some of that research.
Well, and a couple of the things about Bitcoin, like the Genesis block is one of the things that got me. I try to dig through things, and the Genesis block has multiple prayers and scripture written into it. And one of the things that I found fascinating is that you have Genesis, which would be the beginning of the Bible. And I love that you bring this up all the time, that the slaves, the Pharaoh's slaves in Genesis paid 20%. I paid 40%. And you have Genesis, the beginning. And then you have in the middle, in the last few years, El Salvador, the savior came, right? So you have all these things, and there's scripture in block 666, 666 also has scripture condemning the devil. So I oftentimes hear that like Bitcoin satanic. I mean, first of all, I don't know how a protocol built on mathematics and physics can be satanic. It's just math, but to each his own. We all have our own theory. But when you dig through it, you start seeing that the entire purpose of this was to create an even playing field. So Bitcoin isn't just money. It's this huge, secure network, literally its own energetic nation. And in the middle of it all, it does the two things that replace a central bank who steal your livelihood, time, talents, and treasures from your life. It produces money. That's what Federal Reserves do. They make money and they manage monetary policy. So by itself, from inception, I've been saying this the 315. I now know. So now I can follow those posts and comment on them. But one of the interesting things that I've always noticed is like, why hasn't anyone correlated the orange president and the orange coin and the exact same psychological operation run against it? The exact same. It's the exact same psyop.
No, as you said, like, you know, it's meant what Genesis block is January 3rd. 6 days later, January 9th, you get a 369 there. There's actually vortex math built into Bitcoin as well, right? Every halving cycle is 210,000 blocks. 2 + 1 = 3, right? Then you get 420. 4 + 2 = 6. Then you get 9 or 630. Then you get 6 + 3 = 9. So vortex math is part of Satoshi's code, actually.
Yeah.
And funny enough, you know, Trump's uncle was the first person to get access to the Tesla files itself. Tesla talked about the energy currency. Ford talked about an energy currency. And so there's, again, multiple ways to get to that, you know, some of that stuff. But you're right. Like, it is about sovereignty. It is about freedom. It is about removing the powers of the old guard. It is about removing global theft, right? And we're taking our power back, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so, but you know, at the end of the day, though, people need to learn how to say no, right? That's the biggest part of this, is that to truly undomesticate yourself, you have to stop giving any, like, you know, you give full irreverence to authority. Like, I mean, you know, I'm not saying you violate every law, but laws that are not within your moral code, why would you voluntarily pay your taxes to pedophiles? Now, Trump is making this a lot easier, saying he's going to eliminate the IRS, which again was part of my thesis, you know, and funny enough, the IRS is located at 1111 Northwest Constitutional Avenue, and Northwest is actually another 315 hit. So it's actually 135 degrees to where people can, like, on a compass, so it's like I said, like, it's just fascinating. It's fascinating.
But the taxes are going right into a book we talked about before we started recording, is a sovereign individual. This is the era of protectionism, where a nation state who's losing its power, right? So we overtax everybody, which drives out innovation. You're watching somebody posted earlier today, like Dubai has it right, El Salvador has it right. Well, this is by prediction in 1996 with the sovereign individual, where certain nations would open their doors, reduce taxes, tariff, import, export to provide sovereignty for a nation and attract innovation and people with wealth. And Trump is noticing that America is the most taxed nation in the world, has the lowest tariffs in the world, and all of our innovators are leaving to Dubai and El Salvador. And most of these people are leaving to those areas because they're very Bitcoin friendly, very Bitcoin friendly. So you're watching these sovereign people moving into sovereign money. And I love that we started this out, because I really honestly don't care. I check the price of Bitcoin like 4 times a week. I actually check the hash rate. That's what I check. I check that every day because that part fascinates me. That's true decentralization. And in this model, where we're at, I do believe in the next 4 years, it'll be super entertaining watching people in Congress argue over why they should continue to steal from you and why you should continue to vote for them. So that'll be entertaining in the next year. But I think we'll be in an era with high tariffs, like we should have reciprocal. I think today, Canada and Mexico go live tomorrow, 25%. That's by design, keeps things within the system. You lower the taxes on people who live here. You give them competing offers, allow them the choice of, hey, you want to use the dollar, you want to use Ethereum, you want to use Bitcoin, you can use it. I think we're going to see that in 2027. I think that we won't, I don't know that we'll ever see Bitcoin forced as legal tender, because the way that El Salvador did it isn't the right way to do it. Like it's just not. When you force everyone to take it who doesn't want it, it worked. 8.5% or 600,000 people in the country still use Bitcoin today. That was the model. I've been telling people for 4 years, proxy nations are the model for what comes to this country. El Salvador, I believe, is 100% the proxy of American future. And now they're what are they mining with volcanic energy? Rubio just cut a nuclear deal with them. What do you think they're using this for? I'm in mining. So I talked to a guy yesterday who told me point blank, Ethiopia and Russia are mining at zero cost because the government's paying for the energy to mine. Like this is the future. You will see, Lowry puts it best, you'll see a hash force. That'll be the next one that you see out there, because hashing, decentralized computing power are the future of the world, whether you want to see it or not. And I really want to thank you for this time, because I see a lot of these, we're both Bitcoiners. You're a maxi, I'm an only, if we have to categorize ourselves that way, which I don't. I mean, I'm an economist and I don't see anything better out there as a vortex for fiat. But when we look at things from this perspective, people are going to buy what they want. It's your money. Do what you want. We're not sitting here to tell you if you want to buy an altcoin or you want to buy an NFT or you want to buy a meme, that's your money. We're expressing our point of view and our thesis of where we are right now, believing that Bitcoin is the best and probably only digital option for freedom. That is my ultimate goal. I really don't care about ROI. Most of the places that tell you they have ROI, they tell you way too late, right? Oh, we just 6x, buy us now. Terrible time to buy. After a 6x, not a good time. But when you see something consistently rising for 16 years and all this Fidelity coming in and BlackRock and all the institutional adoption, nation state conversation, I want to wrap it up as we get through this. But in the end, it's your money. Listen to everything. Don't get caught into an echo chamber. Listen to every point of view of every possible investment. And in the end, resoundingly, you will find the one that's best for you. And I think that overwhelmingly, if you do the right research, you end up at Bitcoin. But before we do that, in this nation state adoption, what is I personally do not want, and I'll get ripped on this on Twitter. I actually do not want the federal government to buy Bitcoin at all. I really don't. I would rather see the states adopt it so it's still decentralized in ownership. I don't know if that will happen. What are your thoughts on that? I actually don't care at all about it. I think it's a complement to the network itself. But whether it happens or not doesn't affect or impact my life. What are your thoughts on that as we close out?
Yeah, look, I mean, do I want the best proof of work protocol out there to prop up my corrupt government in California? Not really, not really. It's kind of a double-edged sword. I see both sides of it. Like, hey, we as Americans need to, have a Bitcoin reserve. We need to have a hash force. And I get that. I think there's a compelling reason for that. But the way it's being rolled out with Trump screaming from the rooftops that he's going to create a stockpile is literally trying to give you, the individual, first right to this stuff. He's saying, hey, guys, the train is leaving the station. He's saying that to other countries, too. Hey, you other countries out there, citizens of these other countries, He's literally installing nation or worldwide FOMO for the entire world. And look, people are going to do what they're going to do, and what we're going to end up with is a governance model of really just service providers. And so the states that adopt it, it's going to root out their corruption probably quicker, right? So maybe California actually it roots out their corruption quicker. Maybe it's a good thing.
That's a big job.
But every avenue is a losing battle for them. So it doesn't really matter if they adopt it or not. It's gonna be I think these little citadels, as we call them, will eventually kind of rise and to be a part of that citadel, and they'll offer services that are associated with that. And so we may move away from these states and this federalism to where it gets back more to federalism, to where you're right. The states have the individual powers, and that you can operate in the states you want to, and they can provide services to you. But either way, they're screwed, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that he's just kind of raising awareness. And I think the other thing that's happening, and I don't hear anyone talking about this, is you're watching altcoins get exposed.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter which one you're talking about. It doesn't matter who it is. I'm not going to be offensive, and they'll probably come on my page, but I'm not going to offend anyone else. But they all do the same thing. You mint it out of broad daylight, middle of nowhere, just boom, here we have all these tokens. And then you give them to marketers, and they build a market, and I sell them into it, and I make a fortune, and I buy Bitcoin with it, and I tell you Bitcoin's terrible, and then I can tell you to continue to buy from me. I think that operation is being exposed in grand scale through meme coins, Ethereum. The Ethereum hack is super interesting to me, that already 150 million has been converted into Bitcoin. So like, they were roundabout stealing Bitcoin by liquidating Ethereum. And that debate, like, are you decentralized? Can you roll it back? If you can roll it back, you're not decentralized. It's just that simple. And they've rolled it back before. So we'll see this, I think, happen with all the major altcoins. And that's not to say that I hate those projects. I actually love these blockchains. I think there are so many incredible blockchains out there that move money quick, that can do cool things. I just don't see the value in the native currency, and the market doesn't either, because Bitcoin's 60% dominant. And when Bitcoin moves on a big day up or down, it's moving basically 50% of Ethereum or 100% of the next competitor. Like, that's a daily shift in that market. It's really kind of embedded. But that's been great. It's been great talking with you, G-Money. Thank you for coming on here today. This has been a great conversation of really just breaking down some things out there that are common psyops, lies, misconceptions, untruths, mistruths, whatever they may be. But I think we need to do this pretty much all across the Bitcoin ecosystem, because a lot of Bitcoin educators podcasts, they're just way up here, and we need to bring it right back down here, because right now is the biggest influx of people getting into this network. And I think that we need to do a much better job of being educational and polite. All right. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do.
Easy to do for the shitcoiners and the degens in your chat. Their DNA goes to zero against Bitcoin. And so we won't apologize for it. And we won't we won't dumb it, we'll try to help them out. But for the ones that go against it, like, you're just going to get wrecked in the end. And so, have fun staying poor.
Yeah. I mean, like, buy some Bitcoin, do the other stuff you want to. That's fine. It's your money. It's not my money. Do it, but have some Bitcoin, and please just start telling the truth about things out there about this. Like, the Tether thing to me is one thing that really just kind of sat in my stomach for a few weeks. And I'm like, why isn't anyone speaking up here? This is totally untrue.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I don't know. Maybe they have, maybe they're Fort Knox and they have no gold. I don't know that. But at the same time, Lutnick is a pretty good choice. He's a 40-year friend of Trump who was just appointed head of commerce. And maybe we should start looking into, if I was an altcoiner, I'd be looking into Bitcoin content. That's just all I'm saying right now. I'd be looking into it and allocating some money. So G-Money, let everybody know where they can get a hold of you, and some of the stuff that you provide out there. Like, just kind of dump it out here for us and see how people can connect with you.
Yeah, I'm on X as G-Money Pepe. So just G-Money Pepe, all one word. And then Thursday nights on Rumble, we're on Badlands Media. And then you can find us on Telegram. That's where the fun usually happens, at Bullion BS, or you can look for Rug Pull Radio. And that's pretty much where you can get me. You can also go to my website at endthebankers.com. My content is on there. More of the Substacks and information about these Bitcoin NFTs and the full esoteric nature that is included with them. So come check it out.
Rug Pull Radio is great. The Thursday night episodes are great. You just had Gary Cardone on there. It was a great show.
Yep.
I forgot the guy's name. You have the grandfather of mining that was on there. That guy was fantastic.
I had Fred Thiel. We had Bob Burnett. Yeah, a lot of great guests.
Yeah, great
Big,
stuff. Well,
we
GMoney,
had Sailor episode
thank you,
too.
brother.
I got to ask Sailor the 1111 question. That was pretty funny.
Oh, you had Sailor on?
Yeah.
I did not know that. How did I miss? I'm going to look that up today. I didn't.
Oh
How
yeah.
did I
Go
miss
look
that?
it up. I don't know, man, but it was pretty good because we literally asked it right to his face. It was pretty funny. And he just said, this is kind of funny way of like the universe winking back at you or something like that. I was like, okay, MIT guy.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks for being here today, and God bless you all out there. God bless this country. Do a little research, have a little fun. Follow GMoney out there.